Hey guys, welcome back. Today we want to talk about the major differences between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, and also what problems might have existed if the Bill of Rights were never added to the Constitution. So to get started, the Anti-Federalists and the Federalists inadvertently formed the first two political parties in the United States. And they had a lot of disagreements over much of the foundational ideas of our American government. But they had two big disagreements, and we'll talk about those in just a second. The Anti-Federalists, as their name implies, they were against something. The Anti-Federalists were actually against the ratification of the Constitution as it existed in 1787. Now, ratification, that's a really important word, and I want you to know it. So somewhere in your notes that you're taking right now, because I know you're taking notes, you need to type ratification, and to ratify something means to approve it or accept it. Okay, so whenever I talk about the ratification of the Constitution, I'm talking about the approval or the acceptance of the Constitution. So just put that in the back of your brain somewhere. So the Anti-Federalists, they were against the ratification of the Constitution as it existed in 1787. And here was their main problem with it. The original Constitution did not include a Bill of Rights. So let's think for a second what the Bill of Rights are. The Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, and it includes some of the really important amendments like freedom of speech and religion, the right to bear arms, the freedom from self-incrimination, the protection against cruel and unusual punishment and excessive bail. So lots of those really important rights and guarantees that we have as American citizens can be found in the Bill of Rights. So basically, the Anti-Federalists were saying we are not going to accept the Constitution unless it has this Bill of Rights, unless the citizens are guaranteed specific rights and specific protections. Now, I'm going to talk about the Federalist perspective here in a second, but the Anti-Federalists also had a very specific idea about what the central government should be. Now, whenever we're talking about the central government, we mean the federal government that's in Washington, D.C. right now. So those terms central government and federal government mean the same thing, okay? So the Anti-Federalists believed that the central government should be very weak, that they shouldn't have the authority to infringe on the day-to-day lives of people, that the governing of day-to-day life issues should be left up to the state governments or to the regional governments. And the Anti-Federalists believed that was important because they thought that the states and the lower regional governments were better representations of the people and better understood what the people wanted and needed. So with that knowledge, I want you to think about what system of government the Anti-Federalists would have been in favor of. Would they have wanted a unitary system? Would they have wanted a federal system? Or would they have wanted a confederal system? And some popular Anti-Federalists that hopefully you've heard of by this point in your education, Thomas Jefferson, George Mason, and Patrick Henry. So moving on then to the Federalists. If the Anti-Federalists are against ratification of the Constitution, then of course the Federalists would be in favor of it. So the main point of disagreement between the two groups was over the existence of a Bill of Rights in the federal Constitution. The Federalists weren't necessarily against a Bill of Rights. They didn't think that you should not have the freedom of speech and press and all that kind of stuff. They just felt that the addition of a Bill of Rights to the national Constitution would be unnecessary. And they believed that because each of the states already had their own state constitution. Like Missouri right now, we have our own state constitution. Well, each of the 13 original states also had their own state constitutions. And most of them had a Bill of Rights already included in their state constitutions. So the Federalists just thought it was kind of unnecessary. It was repetitive. It wasn't something that needed to be in the federal Constitution. So they also disagreed on the size of the federal government. The Federalists believed that the central government or the national government should have more power than it did under the Articles of Confederation. So if you can think back with me real quickly, under the Articles of Confederation, the federal government had no authority to tax. The federal government had no authority to regulate trade or to enforce laws. There was no clear leader. There was no president as we know one today. There was no judicial branch. So it was very, very weak. And the Federalists argued that the central government should be beefed up a little bit. They should be given more power in order to govern effectively. And some popular Federalists that you hopefully know, George Washington and John Adams, were all considered they were both considered part of the Federalist Party. So ratification. It's important to understand that the ratification of the Constitution wasn't what we call now a foregone conclusion, meaning it wasn't just something that everyone expected to pass. Okay? Now, it's difficult for us to look back in that whole expression, hindsight is 2020, that we can look back on history and we can realize that everything's going to work out fine, that the Constitution is going to be ratified and everything's going to be great. Well, at the time of ratification, people didn't know that. Okay, they didn't have the privilege of the whole hindsight thing. So ratification was not something that came quickly. Okay, we celebrated Constitution Day on September 17th. So September 17th, 1787, the Constitution was approved by Congress. It wasn't until June of 1788 when the required 9 out of 13 states finally ratified the Constitution. So just keep that in mind, that it wasn't something that happened quickly, and it wasn't something that everyone knew was just absolutely positively going to happen. So the ratification map, and I want to go ahead and get you to this screen. The ratification map is kind of cool, and this is a website that we're going to use periodically throughout this year. It's neat to look at what the United States would have looked at in 1787. So what I'm hovering over right here is Massachusetts. Now, Massachusetts, the southern part here, that's what we know Massachusetts to be today. But Massachusetts in 1787 also included what we now know as Maine. Okay, Maine did not become a state until the Missouri Compromise, when Missouri became a state. Okay, so if you notice here, Virginia is another state that looks a lot different on this map than it does today. Virginia today does not include West Virginia, does not include Kentucky, but in 1787 it did. North Carolina is another one. North Carolina included in 1787 what we now know as Tennessee. So everything looked a little different way back in 1787. But Delaware actually became the first state to ratify the Constitution on December 7th, 1787. And this map is kind of cool because it also shows you not only when the state ratified the Constitution, but also what the vote was. So if we look up here at Rhode Island, Rhode Island ratified the Constitution May 29th, 1790. So it took them almost a full 3 years after the Constitution was approved by Congress to pass it. And if you notice, they voted only 34 to 32 in favor of passing the Constitution. So that's a perfect example of one that was not absolutely positively in favor of the Constitution. So with that, I will stop for today, and we will discuss the Federalists and Anti-Federalists in more detail in class. So if you guys have any questions, please let me know. See ya.